今年是中国实施“十三五”规划开局之年，我们积极适应和引领经济发展新常态，坚持全面深化改革，坚持创新驱动发展，加快经济发展方式转变和经济结构调整，经济运行在合理区间。前3季度，中国经济增速为6.7%，最终消费支出对国内生产总值增长贡献率达到71%。第3产业增加值占国内生产总值比重上升至52.8%。1067万人，城乡居民收入差距继续缩小。中国经济发展质量和效益不断提升，新动力正在强化，新业态中国正处在全面建成小康社会决胜阶段，我们以创新、协调、绿色、开放、共享5大发展理念为引导，以供给侧结构性改革为主线，培育新的经济结构，强化新的发展动能，推动中国经济平稳健康发展。我将着力从以下方面采取措施推动经济发展。第一，着力推进供给侧结构性改革，加快转变经济发展方式。我们将全面深化经济体制改革，努力健全制度体系，使市场在资源配置中起决定性作用和更好地发挥政府作用。我们在适度扩大总需求的同时，用改革的办法推进结构调整，促进产业优化重组，优化要素配置，增强供给结构对需求变化的适应性和灵活性，为经济持续健康发展提供源源不断的内生动力。第二，着力促进创新发展，实现新旧动能转换。我们将坚持创新驱动发展战略，深化科技体制改革，破除思想障碍和制度藩篱，推动科技和经济社会发展深度融合，让一切创新源泉充分涌流。我们将加快产学研深度融合，让机构、人才、市场、资金都充分活跃起来。 形成推进创新发展的强大动力。我们将推动新技术、新产业、新业态蓬勃发展，使创新成果转变为实实在在的经济活动，培育发展的新动力。第三，着力推进高水平双向开放，坚持互利共赢。我多次强调，中国开放的大门永远不会关上，只会越开越大。我们将实行更加积极主动的开放战略，创造更全面、更深入、更多元的对外开放格局。我们将加大放宽外商投资准入，推进国内高水平、高标准自由贸易试验区建设，完善法治化、便利化、国际化的营商环境，促进内外资企业一视同仁、公平竞争。我相信，随着一系列重大改革举措的持续推进，中国投资软环境将更加开放、更宽松、更透明，为外资企业分享中国发展机遇创造更为有利的条件。我们也将鼓励更多的企业走出去，扩大对外投资，搭建互利共赢的合作新平台。我们将深入参与经济全球化进程，支持多边贸易体制，推进亚太自由贸易区建设，推动区域全面经济伙伴关系协定尽早结束谈判。第四，着力实现共享发展、绿色发展，增进人民福祉。中国古语说：“治国有常，而利民为本。”秘鲁谚语说：“人民的声音就是上天的声音。”顺应人民群众对美好生活的向往，就要做到发展成果由人民共享。我们将完善再分配调节机制，在做大蛋糕的同时，分好蛋糕，扩大中等收入群体。我们将大力推进脱贫攻坚战，在2020年前确保现行标准下5575万农村贫困人口全部脱贫。我们将深入推进健康中国建设，为人民提供全生命周期的卫生与健康服务。绿水青山就是金山银山，我们将坚持可持续发展战略，推动绿色低碳循环发展，建设天蓝、地绿、水清的美丽中国，让人民切实感受到发展带来的生态效益。 中国经济发展前景是光明的。中国发展是世界的机遇。预计未来5年，中国进口总额将达到8万亿美元，利用外资总额将达到6000亿美元，对外投资总额将达到7500亿美元，出境旅游将达到7亿人次。这将为世界各国提供更广阔的市场、更充足的资本、更丰富的产品、更宝贵的合作契机。女士们、先生们、朋友们，25年前，中国正式成为亚太经合组织成员。25年里，中国同各成员风雨同舟，携手走过的是一条聚焦发展、共谋繁荣之路，是一条持续开放、深度融合之路，是一条锐意进取、勇敢创新之路，是一条互敬互助、共同发展之路。中国一步步走向亚太，亚太也一步步走向中国。中国已经成为绝大多数亚太经合组织成员主要贸易伙伴和出口市场。大家都知道，拉美是地瓜等薯类作物的原产地。我特别爱吃这里的地瓜土豆。我曾给中国的一些企业家呀举过地瓜的例子。我说，你看那个地瓜啊，它的藤蔓向四面八方延伸，但它的块茎啊始终长在根基位置。同样道理，不管发展到什么程度，中国都将扎根亚太，建设亚太，造福亚太。中国将坚定不移走和平发展道路，奉行互利共赢的开放战略，在谋求自身发展的同时，积极带动亚太国家共同发展，为本地区人民创造更多的机遇。工商界是全球经济最活跃的力量，是推动改革发展创新的主力军。希望大家勇立潮头，积极行动，在合作中实现共赢，在耕耘中收获果实，为亚太乃至全球经济发展做出新贡献。最后，我预祝这次工商领导人峰会取得圆满成功。谢谢大家。
习近平主席阁下的主旨演讲高屋建瓴，日益深远，指出了亚太引领全球增长的新路径，阐释了中国改革发展的新举措，展现了中国与亚太经济合作的新前景，进一步坚定了亚太工商界对实现合作共赢发展的信心。让我们再次以热烈的掌声，对习近平主席阁下发表重要演讲表示衷心的感谢。
Ladies and gentlemen, please, another round of applause for President Xi Jinping of China. Please stay in your seats. We have got 2 more fantastic sessions coming up. Our next session is going to talk about connectivity, a discussion on the new trends that shorten distances, a dialogue on strategies for building connectivity and how this can contribute to inclusive growth. And we've got a fantastic panel of speakers for this session. We have Ian Bremmer, the president of the Eurasia Group. He will be able to provide some fantastic insights into this discussion. We have Scott Price, the president and CEO of Walmart Asia. Doris Ho, president and CEO of A.PEC, also a APEC member for the Philippines. And Peggy Johnson, the executive vice president of business development for Microsoft, and who is also an APEC Business Advisory Council member for the USA. So please do stay in your seats. We are just going to reset the stage, and we'll be right back in about 2 minutes' time. Thank you.
That we're having this discussion again. So then there's a broader question, too, about what does technology particularly mean for inclusive capitalism? Are we actually getting the benefits from technology that are broadly spread and making the world generally better, or is it still really benefiting a relatively small part of the population? And if so, what do we need to do over the next few years as a business community and also a broader community to ensure that the benefits of connectivity, whether it be technologically or otherwise, supply chains and so forth, how is that broadly spread? So to start us off, I wanted to ask each of our panelists to talk about what for their organizations, what are the trends that improve connectivity that they are most excited about with a sort of 5-year view, and then ask a bit about how the recent events that have called some of the movement towards more connectivity into question, how that's changing their thinking, their strategy. And I'm going to start with Peggy from Microsoft, who you got a name check even in a Facebook presentation, which must have felt good.
I heard that. Yes, that was nice of Mark. What we think a lot about as technology proceeds forward, we need to ensure that people aren't left behind. And our mission statement at Microsoft is to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. But when you think about some of the things that Mark said, we still have about 4 billion people who aren't connected to the internet. But even before they get connected to the internet, there's about 1 billion people who have no connectivity to electricity and another billion where it's very sporadic. So then we have to really start at the basics there. And I'm encouraged because I think technology can actually play a role in solving some of those problems. For instance, we've been working with a company, M-Kopa, in Africa. And they have a solar-powered device that they can bring into communities that are completely off the grid, set it down, and the families can pay as they use it. And so many times they just need a few hours of electricity in the evenings for the kids to study. And it's all managed in the cloud by another company called New Sun Road that handles the management and the payment system of it. So it's fantastic. You can bring it into a village with no electricity. Then once they have electricity, we've been working with a program at Microsoft called Affordable Access. And so Mark talked a little bit about this as well. There's a lot of great programs going on. We've chosen to focus on the last mile. So many times urban cities in these regions have connectivity. You get out there into the last mile, it's much, much harder. But we have an opportunity to use something called TV white spaces. So when the analog to digital movement happened with TV channels, it left large swaths of spectrum available that can be reused in these communities for connectivity. And so really technology can play a role in solving some of these super difficult problems that, that really all of us really need to help solve, so that we can bring the same benefits that we get in the established markets to the emerging markets.
And what are the sort of main areas where you're seeing dramatic change in the adoption of some of these ideas, like the Internet of Things and the cloud and so forth?
Well, for sure, just having the ability to access information, right? So you can deliver healthcare that way. An expectant mother can ask a question of a doctor 1,000 miles away. You can have a farmer who is getting information about crops and things from far away as well. And so sometimes it's just these little bits of information that can change people's lives. You can deliver education that way. Again, Mark talked a little bit about that. So in these communities, the basics are what are transforming lives.
Scott, from Walmart's perspective, what are the short-term connectedness trends that you're most excited about over the next few years?
You know, I think the last 12 months have been jarring for many people around the decisions being made by many populations in terms of their view as to how are they included in their economies. And I think there is a real sense since the financial crisis that people do not think that growth has been inclusive. And I think some themes are emerging like global trade, et cetera, et cetera. So if I look at the role of connectivity, I think connectivity actually starts to offer an opportunity for a level playing field. So from a Walmart perspective, traditionally in our stores, in order to do business with us, you had to have an inventory to be able to fill 4,500 stores. The massive capital and the access to manufacturing required for that meant that we, for the most part, only dealt with large-scale businesses. But with the advent of the digital economy, the advent of marketplace, we now have an opportunity to offer a platform across the 21 APEC countries and even more broadly, the opportunity for small businesses to make their products accessible to a much larger population than they've ever been able to before. So if I look at the example in Peru, several years ago, we started a small-scale business in Peru about bringing in blueberries. There's a lot of white periods in the United States where blueberries are simply not available. We now have the ability to import for our stores large-scale amounts of blueberries out of Peru, but at the same time, we have a platform for local Peruvian businesses, and many of them women-owned, which is an area that we are very committed to, which will allow them to not have to have the scale-up manufacturing capability to be able to put into 4,500 stores. If they have 100 items, they're able to put it onto the marketplace, and they can create these small businesses. So I think, Peggy, you said the access to information. So we have proud to sponsor the V.A.A. APEC initiative, which basically allows women enterprises that support women-owned businesses, government, and the private sector to come together and offer a platform for small businesses, small women-owned businesses to start to understand how they can trade. So I think the connectivity starts to offer this opportunity of leveling the playing field where it's not just the large scale, but the smaller scale. But what that comes with as a requirement is, one, you have to have internet access in the markets. You have to be able to ensure there's that infrastructure. And the second is the infrastructure for trade. Countries have got to be able to build up the ability to facilitate trade. Facilitate it in terms of movement of goods, but also in terms of data security and how data inflows are going to work amongst markets. And I think that governments have an opportunity to drive a level of trade that is much more inclusive than maybe some of the perceptions that have existed over the last decade.
Doris, you run a big shipping company. We've seen that industry sort of over-optimistic about the demand for its services, so they've got a capacity glut in the industry. You also are an industry that's very much associated with mobile labor by necessity. What are the trends that you see in terms of both underlying trade connectivity growing, or is it leveling off? And for labour mobility?
Well, before I answer your question, Matthew, I just wanted to say that I'm looking at all of you, and I see so many familiar faces. And I think today all of us are here, quite a few lucky chosen few, at this very defining moment in history, where we are seeing tremendous threats to everything that we've worked for over the last decades, that gives this opportunity for everybody. And connectivity being one of them, the internet, technology. We have achieved a lot, but obviously what has come through is that there are a lot of people who are not included in that whole picture. So I think when we look at all these issues of connectivity, technology, you really need to see what, this as a defining moment, maybe a great opportunity to look at what this new normal looks like. What is there a paradigm shift on how we look at how trade will take place? And one part of connectivity that is the most unpopular thing that has never been dealt with in APEC, except for the APEC business travel card, is the issue of people mobility. Yesterday, many people spoke about the greatest DNA requirement for successful trade and growth, which is people. But nobody wants to talk about the people element. So here are some realities. One is that there are a lot of aging populations. Many economies are facing these issues. And even if technology will provide ways for people to be more efficient, there are jobs that nobody wants. There are jobs that nobody wants to do, those that care for elderly people, those that care for young people, young children. And so one of the things that we've worked on in ABAC is how do we create that ability to create the connectivity of people, inclusiveness, where shipping business, there is a model that we have been trying to explain could work to allow the mobility of people to work elsewhere, but to go home and not to become immigrants. We feel that the issue of the connectivity of people to people is very important as we grow our industries.
And I mean, what are you seeing in the day-to-day operations of your business, a reflection of the backlash that's going on, or are you still seeing underlying trends that are positive?
Well, it is the reduction of trade has never ever expressed itself worse than it is today in the shipping business. You know, shipping, as you said, is oversupplied. At the same time, trade has really retracted.
And how much is that more due to cyclical factors or changes in how, you know, where the value is created in supply chains, rather than a sort of consumer distaste for foreign products?
Oh, no. I don't think it has anything to do with the globalization of trade at all. It's just a reflection of the economy. But the one thing that is great that we should look at as far as shipping is it's actually the most global of all. Shipping has been global before you even invented the word, right? So even the way people move has a new global paradigm. And we think that if you were to truly be inclusive and allow opportunities across borders and achieve some of and provide some of the needs that economies have, one way is this whole new circular flow of how people move. As I said, though, it is a very sensitive subject. It is not immigration, it's a sensitive subject, but it is something that everybody's business needs.
Ian Bremer, you at your Asia Group look at the world of business through a political risk lens. I mean, how do you view this conversation about connectivity and the extent to which globalization is becoming a dirty word rather than a good, this is the right way to go philosophy?
I'm glad you linked it to the globalization conversation, because they're very similar, right? I mean, look, it's very easy for us to say that there are things about globalization that we all want. It is hard to argue against blueberries, right? All year long. I'm all in favor. But we all know that there are lots of people in the world that feel with very good reason that globalization has not benefited them. And they're loud about it. And we're seeing governments be overturned as a consequence of it. Connectivity is exactly the same thing. And it's very clear to talk about the efficiency and the growth that can come from connecting the entire world. But let's be clear. You know, when you had 1 billion people in the world connected, those were 1 billion people that were largely very happy with the status quo. They were either in advanced industrial democracies or they were in emerging markets, but liked the advanced industrial democracies, right? And they were happy with APEC and Davos and organizations like that. You put 4 billion people on the internet, you're Mark Zuckerberg, say, let's get 7 billion people on the internet. You're going to have a lot of connected people that are deeply dissatisfied with the status quo. People that deeply mistrust Mark Zuckerberg and Microsoft and all the CEOs and the banks. Enormous backlash, which does not mean that we don't want them connected. It means that we have to be prepared for the political tendencies that will occur as a consequence of that connectedness, and also a recognition that there will increasingly be strong vested interests in the world that will not want connectedness, that will want walls. A final point, in addition to the backlash that comes from connectedness, when people haven't been bought in and when you haven't made the social contract fit for purpose, there's also the issue of connected to what, connected to whom. I mean, it's very obvious. The largest delegation at APEC is China. We just spoke after Xi Jinping. A lot more people for him than are for us, right?
But there are more coming in now as the conversation heats up. It's good to see.
True. But most connected people in China are not connected to Facebook. They're connected to Chinese, right? They're connected to Chinese social media. And if you look at the alt-right in the United States compared to Silicon Valley, you recognize that actually, even in the US, you have different groups that are connected to very different things. Al Jazeera is not what it used to be in the Middle East. People that are connected in the Middle East are connected much more in terms of narrower demographics, having much more to do with identity politics. Now, at least in the West, most of us are politically apathetic. So even if we're connected to Fox News or MSNBC or the left and right in the UK, at the end of the day, we're more interested in how our kids are doing in school and what we're having for breakfast. But in emerging markets, right, where you have larger numbers of people who are connected that are thoroughly dissatisfied with the status quo, that connectedness is going to be much more exclusionary vis-a-vis other connectedness. So what we're going to see is more connectedness and more fragmentation. More connectedness and more political conflict, even as the amount of wealth that we have to distribute is indeed going up because these tools are extraordinary.
So if I was talking Silicon Valley language, I'd be saying, you know, how much of the problem here is the operating system of global capitalism, global connectedness, and how much is it the user interface that somehow, you know, the experience of it isn't being communicated in a way that's very customer friendly. I mean, but essentially, you know, this is a good system. I think most people most of the people you meet in Davos or you hear on the stage in Davos, they would have a genuine conviction that greater connectivity, greater globalization was delivering, you know, better lives for more and more people that, you know, we've seen since 2000, all these hundreds of millions of people coming out of poverty around the world. By the global Millennium Development Goal measures, the world has been making a lot of progress, and yet people don't feel it. And is that a problem fundamentally with the model of globalization, or is this problem more in how it's being communicated and experienced by people on the ground?
I would argue that wealth generation for globalization is clearly the driver, and everybody likes that. Let's raise the boats. But let's also be clear that growing inequality is a feature of globalization. It's not a bug. And there has been a level of polite indifference on the part of those that drive globalization, including the governments that have fostered it, to that feature of globalization. I think that will also be true for inequality. Look, at the end of the day, the people that are driving processes of connectivity are generally good people. I have no doubt in my mind that there has been enormous effort to create better education, better health systems, deal with disease, longevity, and we can applaud those things. But to the extent that those same processes, which are very aligned to connectivity, are also creating identity backlash, where to address it would be to really undermine your own model, no one is the villain of their own narrative. No one, right? Not you, not me, not Zuckerberg, not bin Laden. Right? Everyone believes that they're trying to do something for their constituents. And when you point out that there's something fundamental to what they're doing that actually causes backlash, that's when they tend to ignore it a lot more. It's like what's happening with labor. Technology is awesome, and yet you're losing jobs everywhere. There are very few people that really want to address the core of that. They want to help people. They want to ensure the money they're making makes a difference, but do they really want to fundamentally address that in ways that could hurt their model? The answer is no. That's where we have a challenge.
Scott.
In some ways, we're now talking about the dark side of connectivity, because the radical transparency is allowing radical misinformation, and it's undermining trust in organizations, it's undermining trust in processes, and I think, you know, it's incumbent upon all of us to try and figure out how you manage the information and the communication so that you're actually building the trust in your organization, you're protecting your reputation and your brand, as opposed to just this reactive nature. And I'm reading more and more in your world, Peggy, that there are now tools being created and bots being created to try and offset some of this in misinformation. But I think right now there's a huge gap between people's even understanding and concept of global trade. It's becoming a boogeyman that I don't think is accurate.
I can't help but be struck by how, if, for example, in America, I imagine that many of your most loyal customers, buying product from one of the most globalized companies in the world, if not the most, in terms of the supply chain and so forth, would yet have been many of the same voters that voted, against globalization effectively in the election in the US last week. How do we bridge that disconnect?
So if you go back to how Walmart began, it began with an insight of Sam Walton that people who lived in rural areas were underserved and paid much higher prices than people who had access to choice. And he began what he felt was a process by which he was helping our customers save money so that they can live better. And that is basically the mission that existed in 1962 and exists today. In that process of helping people save money and live better, all of our customers benefited by this wave of the global trade that gave them access to lower cost products. It allowed them to clothe their children. It allowed them to access food year round. Again, the blueberry in the north. I grew up in Minnesota. There were no blueberries in January. Now there are. But the reality is that those individuals are now starting to feel like they have been left behind, that they don't have the same opportunities now in the rural areas as people who may live in cities in terms of jobs, in terms of access to wealth, and in terms of access to education. And I think that is the dilemma. How are we going to figure out that balance where you can still get blueberries in January, but at the same time ensure that individuals feel that they have jobs, that they have the same access and their ability to live the American dream that their parents did? I think that's the dilemma that we're trying to resolve right now.
And certainly, I mean, in terms of the American context, again, I mean, there was a lot of bashing of China in the recent election, and you probably of all companies, are bringing Chinese product into the US as part of that pocketbook story. I mean, how do you communicate the reality of what people are benefiting from to them in a way that that wouldn't make them so hostile in that sense to globalization?
There's two sides to that. So first, the fact base. The vast majority of what we sell in the United States, we manufacture or procure in the United States. So by far more than half, the exact number, I think 70% roughly. And if you were to look at how we source and where we source, we have a very diverse global portfolio of where we source from. The flip side of that is we have over 400 stores in China. We have a digital platform. We have Chinese customers. The vast majority of what we sell in our stores in China, we're sourcing from China. Again, it's trying to get to the fact base of what are the products that are moving. And what's ending up happening is that the The store themselves is becoming less relevant than the product. So you now see, by I think it's estimated 2025, there'll be $1 trillion of cross-border B2C trade. These are individuals who are now able, in language with payment options, to be able to access products, and they're willing to pay the cost of manufacturing and bring it to them. So even the citizens of the world are becoming more global in their ability to bring products. And we think that there's a role that we can play in it. I don't think that there is any value to trying to shut down borders anyway. I don't think that's the benefit of what the average person is after. I think what they're looking for is scrutiny, and that there is a sense of fairness in the process. That in one market benefits, the other market should benefit as well. And I think that's probably what we're going to have a lot of dialogue on over the next few years, is how do you make sure that global trade in some ways is also balanced in fair trade.
Doris, I mean, I mean, from the Philippine perspective, I mean, you've obviously had, as a country, elected someone that, you know, is being cited on the list of new hardline governments that are, you know, in some ways pushing back against the connected world. I mean, what do you think is going on? How does business have an opportunity to, I guess, ensure that the public feels it's being heard, yet doesn't react in a way that, you know, actually sort of kills the good things that have been going on, that have actually been helping over the last few years?
I think what's so interesting is that listening to all of you, you're speaking about the anger that some people who've been excluded in the United States. Well, in the Philippines, it was also the same way. I, as an ignorant person, found out that there was a lot of anger as well. And the election was not the poor, it was the middle class. And these are the middle class that are working in call centers and BPOs that are serving American markets, because we speak English. And so I was just thinking as you spoke, how interesting it is that maybe this connectivity creates an expectation that is not being managed. And imagine that a person in Manila, by the way, when you call your American Express or your bank call center, you can hear it's a Filipino voice on the other end. So can you imagine what an amazing opportunity that has given? So why is this Filipino who has now a new opportunity to work in this also angry? There are other issues as far as the need to get rid of corruption, blah, 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 and all this stuff. But I guess we're talking more about what these expectations that are brought up from connectivity are bringing in. Our president is actually very, very determined to address poverty and corruption. And part of that includes drugs. I know you've heard all this, and I don't want to get into that subject. But I'm very sure that, one, he is very honest, and two, he's truly determined to stop corruption at all levels of government. And by the way, I was with him last night, and the first thing he wants to do is to open up so that everybody can provide broadband to be available for everyone. So I think he sees it, and I think he sees that eventually, you know, this building out, the other part of his agenda is helping SMEs get into the internet. So it's really funny, because it's actually a dichotomy, right? On one hand, all this is creating expectations, it's creating an ability to express your anger. On the other hand, it's offering opportunity. So maybe what is lacking, I'm thinking maybe it's the management of it. In the olden days, somebody stood on a soapbox to scream, and then we all got worried when TV came along that maybe people knew things so readily. And today there is this information that's creating this kind of ability, one, to express what you feel, and the other hand, ability to really feel an expectation that cannot be met. But maybe it's not the job, maybe it's something else.
But in the case of the Philippines, you would feel that the anger is less to do with the experience of greater globalization and connectivity. No, we don't have that.
As a matter of fact, we're hoping to put more globalization. People don't understand, because our economy is led by domestic consumption. Yeah.
And Peggy, I just wanted to pick up on another theme that certainly in America and Europe has been, you know, emerging over the last couple of years, which is that the view of technology and technological innovation and greater connectivity as an inevitable good thing is being challenged, particularly as we hear more and more about the potential of machine learning and artificial intelligence, and there's this notion that all the jobs are going to be taken by robots, and, you know, if not by foreigners, then by robots. And so that has added to a sort of sense of, let's just hunker down, let's not liberalize, let's not have any more of this newfangled connectivity. What do you make of that critique, and where's that going to go over the next few years?
Well, I mean, for sure, innovation that we see coming out of places like Seattle and Silicon Valley is amazing. But, you know, I talked a little bit about the current gap with technologies, and we have to fill that gap. But I think looking forward, where technology is going, we have to go into that world mindful of that gap and design from the beginning for that gap, to design in an inclusive manner. I think you may have heard this idea of the fourth industrial revolution. They talk about it at Davos a lot, with the first industrial revolution being the steam engine about 250 years ago. And about 150 years ago, the combustion engine, and these were great things that caused big shifts in everybody's lives, increased lifespan, education for more people, a power grid that largely delivered electricity to everyone. And then we hit about 1969 or so, the microprocessor. And clearly everybody here in the we started a conversation. In fact, our CEO, Satya Nadella, put out a blog about his thoughts on artificial intelligence. And when you were talking about but his point was, those are great laws. They're a good basis as we start off into this machine world, but it shouldn't be about man versus machine. It shouldn't just be about, well, can the machine beat us at Jeopardy or Go? It should be about machines augmenting the human experience. That's what we ought to focus on. And to do that, as we start to develop in this area, we first need to make sure everybody has the tools. You heard Mark Zuckerberg talk about the laboratoria, this coding academy that is based here, and they're starting to spread in other areas. Get people prepared for a 21st century education. And then, as we start to build these things, we need to have diversity on our design teams. If design teams all look like the same kind of person, and we don't have diversity of race and gender and socioeconomical status, we will get products that look like just one group. And so we must be mindful of that, and we have to infuse empathy into our design teams as they begin to build things in artificial intelligence area, so that we build for the broadest communities and not for a single community. So this is coming, and it can be a transformation for good.
By empathy, you mean robots that apologize when they take your job, or do you mean something more than that?
Robots will take some jobs. Yeah. The point is, we should be able to be retraining people to free up cycles, to create new things like solving for complex diseases and eradicating diseases. You can do these types of things when you have massive amounts of data that these big data centers now can reason across. So that's where we want to go. We want to use this tool for good and not keep it just to a few segments of society.
So some of the sort of a gloomier prognosticators about the state of the world would point back to the period just before the First World War, when the world seemed to be at an unprecedented level of connectivity and global integration, and that seemed to have an inevitability about it. And then we went into basically 30 years of dramatic reversals on that front. And I suppose the question being posed now is, to what extent is there any chance of a repeat of that kind of unwinding of the system, and are the nature of the kind of integrational trends that we're seeing at the moment sort of impervious to the rantings of politicians and so forth?
Well, people are scared. I mean, the people that voted for Trump first and foremost were white, undereducated men. There were obviously others, but that was the core group. Well, I mean, think about their position in the United States and the world, and ask how many of those believed that the world and the U.S.-led world was increasingly, didn't have a place for them, certainly didn't have a leading place for them, right? And I mean, the world is obviously, the United States doesn't get to lead the way it used to. It's obviously much more is going to be defined by the 7 billion that live outside the U.S. than live within it. That was an unusual historic period. You know, men aren't going to be as in charge as they have been in the United States or globally. It's harder to get a job even if you're well educated. If you're undereducated, it's a real problem. So they get it. This has happened before. I mean, earlier industrial revolutions, horses used to be relevant. They drove a lot of industry. Now, their population in the U.S. about 1/10 of what it was a century ago, and they're good for food and entertainment. Now, the useful thing is you and I are funny, right? But, you know, the alternatives are not necessarily great. And so I understand why these people are scared. And I understand why the politics are becoming much more divisive. But if there is a hope, the hope comes from the economics. And the fact is, it was Bill Gates who wrote in the opening to the Gates Foundation 2-3 years ago that we now have the ability to ensure economically that no one is going to be in poverty anymore. We never had that ability before, now we do. And the only reason that we can't do it is because of politics. So the thing that worries me the most is that over the course of this U.S. election, and that's in a world where we've had lots of rising populism, the notion of President Trump in 2 months is clearly the biggest game changer of all of them. But over 2 years of the electoral process, at no point did Trump or Hillary talk about the fact that we have to address the fact that it's technology and not globalization that is causing these problems right now. And you can build walls and you can close borders, but you're not stopping technology. You can get rid of H-1Bs. You can make it real hard for Microsoft to hire the people they need in the United States. You can do that. You can give subsidies too. But you're not going to fix addressing this fundamental question. So I have to ask, how quickly is the Trump administration going to pivot to recognition of the fundamental problem that they don't have any answers for? And when I look at their national security team, number one, I see focus on terrorism. Number two, I see focus on proliferation. I don't see focus on climate. I don't see focus on technology. I don't see focus on cyber. The early days tell you this is an administration that is fairly anti-science. That's a problem. The early days tell you that the group in the United States that was strongest in voting against Trump as a class was Silicon Valley. That's a problem. So let's hope that we can build some real fast bridges there, because I don't think it's hopeless at all. I know that human beings have ingenuity. And I also know that human beings are much better at fixing problems when they're urgent than when we can kick them down the road, as we feel about climate. This is a problem that thankfully will be urgent real soon. But that doesn't mean that we're going to fix it.
I mean, you say technology is unstoppable, and I guess I think there have been a number of interesting counter blasts against that in the last few years. I mean, I guess whether it be, Russia shutting down LinkedIn today. I mean, I think in previous the last 2 weeks, we'd have been juxtaposing our first two speakers a little more in terms of China's attitude to Facebook and so forth. And I guess Facebook's efforts to expand the internet in India through basics didn't do so well because there was a backlash politically against it. I mean, is there and then you start to think about cyber attacks, and you start to think about the privacy debate and how that may be producing a balkanization within this sort of interconnected global web. I mean, how inevitable is technology? Well, maybe Ian first and then Peggy.
Well, I mean, I guess I would say I think there's a fundamental difference between shutting down LinkedIn in Russia or keeping Facebook out of China than there is with stopping the fourth industrial revolution. I mean, Peggy mentioned it, went from first to second to third to fourth, each is speeding up. There's no question that if you have a series of very anti-science administrations that are retrograde in what they try to do in regulatory policy, you might be able to severely hamper how much development of the world's technology comes out of the United States as opposed to other places. But, I mean, is there anyone out there that really believes that the present set of political actors could actually stop the fourth industrial revolution from driving the kind of wealth and transformation it is? I I would not be betting very much on that.
Unstoppable fourth industrial revolution, Peggy?
I think unstoppable. I think what we have to be mindful, though, of...
And inherently connected and global. I mean, that's the essence of this fourth industrial revolution.
Right. I think, so to address the fourth industrial revolution, again, sort of the backbone of it is this thing called the cloud, right? It's storage and compute up there somewhere. And that is going to be, and is available broadly as we move into this world where the cloud can be accessed by all sorts of people. We have to do it in a way that we think before we get there about things like responsible cloud. We have to make sure it is open to every race and gender and group. It has to be a trusted cloud, because we know that people won't use technology that they can't trust. I think they're even more mindful of that now. And so as we move there, it must be trusted. And last, it needs to be inclusive. We need to be able to make it affordable for everybody to access.
I mean, how do you have a responsible cloud? Isn't the whole essence of the cloud that it's this sort of invisible thing that's out there that we don't really know where it is? I mean, essentially, so how can we know whether it's being responsible or not?
Well, I don't know if you've ever seen a data center, but these things are massive and they use a lot of energy. Some of these data centers in a few years will use as much energy as small nations. I mean, they're huge. So as we go into that world, we can say, well, let's do it in a transparent way, an open way, be efficient about it. Are there new technologies we can use that will maybe cut down on that? And so it's about thinking of ahead, the problems that we have now. If we're going to go build this big new thing, let's try and solve for some of those things rather than just ignore them and go blindly down the technology path. We are a world of a lot of different types of people, and we need to be mindful of that in this next phase of technology.
So Scott and Doris, I mean, we've been talking about the digital world becoming this inevitable growth in connectivity, and maybe there'll be some blips along the way, but fundamentally unstoppable. But does the same thing apply to your industries, the non-digital part of your industries, in a sense, the inevitability of global supply chains, will we see a resumption in the growth of full ships moving around the planet?
Automated ships.
Automated ships, no jobs. I guess that may be one solution to the mobility of labor problem. Uber for,
No, but I think this word inclusive, it's elusive. But it was, in a way, such a vague idea. It sounded so good. Even last year, that was our theme for the Philippines. But I think today that word inclusive, with what's happening, has made that understanding of it and the application of it no longer something that you don't pay attention to. Mm-hmm. So I think what's so exciting is really being able to make technology relevant and meaningful to everybody. And I love your story, Scott, about how you can have a supplier somewhere that can actually see a market that's somewhere else. And it's only because of technology. And you turn around and see the positive aspect of it. And so one of the things that we've been working on, one of our APEC members, Diane Wang, has been really working hard on this, is how to really teach people how to get on to this thing called e-commerce, how we can actually convince, hopefully the backlash of nationalism does not cut off this opportunities brought about by the BPM business. Hopefully that doesn't happen, because a lot of people in my country benefit from that. I think it's all, one was, I said expectations, the other one is relevance. And how do we make sure that people actually see that it has something to do with them? So there's a lot of things that we need to do to make it not so hard to understand, especially since a lot of the policy is being made by people who are too old to get it. I mean, I think, I love listening to these guys because they really know so much, and it looks like Greek to me. And I think as more and more as the younger generations become the leaders of the world, and perhaps maybe that will change. So how to make it relevant, how to really retrain, how to retool, how to offer those opportunities that technology brings is great. How it affects,
Scott.
So we're a simple retailer. So there's some big topics out here, right? We sell blueberries. There is a lot of fear. There's fear of technology, there's fear that, global trade, et cetera. Ultimately, I think the crux of it is there's a concern that the haves and the have-nots is going to worsen, not get better. That's really simplistic. People feel like they'll never be able to make their way into that haves group or improve their lot in life. So what does a simple retailer do? We're advocates for our customers. We have businesses in 27 countries. We have 200 million customers who around the world every week who come through our stores. We're advocates for them. So what do they expect of us? One, they expect us to operate responsibly. So what does that mean? That means that we look for food and ensure that it's safe, that we try and mitigate the impact upon the globe in terms of sustainability. So how do we make sure that palm oil is forested in a sustainable way? How do we make sure that the seafood that we source is not sourced by slave labor? There's a lot of topics where we do have that power. And so we see our role as advocates of our customers to ensure that we behave in a way that they expect a retailer. But I think there are some broader topics that still have to be addressed in this overall fear that the haves will continue to benefit and the have-nots, whether it be through robotics, whether it be through any of these topics, their lot in life will continue to go down. And I think that's the crux of the issue.
So I think without doubt, we're almost out of time, but without doubt for the last, probably since around 1980, the business community has been able to count on a growing degree of support in government from people who wanted to increase connectivity, bring down borders and so forth. And business has been able, you've been able to be a simple retailer and grow massively into a global corporation because government has been broadly supportive. And I guess the fear, my hunch would be that for the next few years, at least at the rhetorical level, governments, certainly in many countries, are not going to be as supportive of that agenda. So the question I suppose I would end with is, what can the business community, business leaders who have a lot of self-interest, but also they understand the broader benefits to their customers of continuing this process of connectivity and globalization. What can you do to fill the vacuum, to get government and the population on board? Ian, you wanted to jump in at that point.
Well, no, I would look. These are the government business leaders that have to do it. But I felt that Scott's point at the end was extremely important, because everyone here have represented businesses that have tried to make a difference in terms of social responsibility, efficiency, the climate, being activists for their customers. Maybe you could say we could do more or less, but that's been true. But we're talking about something much greater, which is what happens when the social contract feels like it's becoming fundamentally illegitimate. And then we're talking about how do you deal with these people? Are we going to create a universal basic income? Switzerland just thought about it. They failed. That's a small, rich country. Can you do something like that in the United States as a whole? Can you provide benefits to individuals as opposed to through companies if they're not going to be employed through companies going forward? What can you do in fundamentally retraining? Singapore is trying to ensure that everybody's up for digital. Can the United States do that? Does that get done at a decentralized level? And if it does, then is the have and have-not question going to be more between cities and certain cities and other cities? But
do you think business is going to have to be the leading advocate for those policies? And if so...
Let me put it this way. Yeah. If businesses aren't the leading advocate of that, they're going to be villainized. And the businesses that are leaders of that in their sectors, you don't have to outrun the bear. You have to outrun your fellow campers. And for each of these companies, the question is, are you going to be the leader in your industry so that when people get picked off, it's not you, it's the other people that aren't getting it right?
Peggy, what do you think of that?
Well, for me, I think businesses can keep pushing for cross-border data flow. I feel strongly about that because I think it hurts when you hunker down, it can hurt your own small businesses. You can stifle commerce across. And I think that'd be one thing I would just leave with businesses here, and that for governments to have a light touch in the regulations in that area.
Doris, social contract?
I started by saying that all of us in this room have an amazing opportunity to actually change the way the design of that room looks like, and that all of us in our own businesses can make an impact to have different models in how we actually engage suppliers and how we actually help them be part of it and help them be part of that haves.
And I'll leave the last word to you, Scott. I notice in America, Walmart has certainly been trying to change the narrative around pay and people at the bottom of the income ladder, but which seems quite an interesting leadership change in attitudes from the company. But where else do you go there in social contract?
So I think for us, we don't focus upon being the biggest or any of these sorts of things. We're focused very much upon this concept of being the most trusted retailer. We believe that that is where we start to bring together all the pieces of this puzzle. So we want to be the most trusted retailer, and we want to be the fastest camper.
Great. Well, I think this has been a very open and free-flowing and interesting conversation. And I think it's the start of what I fear are going to have to be a lot more conversations about how business operates to, I think, continue to bring the benefits of connectivity and globalization, which I think Mark Zuckerberg explained could potentially be massive in an environment where civil society and the social contract and the political pressures are not going to be in favor of that in anything like the way they should be. So thank you to the panel, and thank you for your ideas.
Ladies and gentlemen, please, another round of applause for our wonderful panel. Thank you very much to Matthew Bishop of The Economist for that wonderful moderating. Thank you very much, Mr. Scott Price from Walmart, Ms. Peggy Johnson from Microsoft, Ian Bremmer, and Ms. Doris Ho. We will have Ian Bremmer back with us this afternoon, and he's going to talk about the new shape of geopolitics across the world, given the recent changes. So I really encourage you to ensure you come back this afternoon for Ian Bremmer's address later on. Now, ladies, if I could invite you to please stay in your seats. We have the President of Mexico and the Prime Minister of New Zealand, along with a distinguished panel where we will be talking about redesigning trade, a dialogue on the strategies for deeper regional economic integration and the new generation of 21st agreements. Together with President Nieto of Mexico and Prime Minister John Key of New Zealand, we have Ken Allen, on the board of management of DP DHL Group and the CEO of DHL Express, Mr. Enrique Gubins, the APEC member for Peru and the CEO of Sudamericana de Fibras, and Mr. Eric Liu, the chairman of Jumor e-commerce. And the moderator for this session is going to be Sean Donan, the World Trade editor from the Financial Times. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are about to begin shortly. If I could invite you to please stay in your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, please, if I could encourage you to please sit in your seats, we will begin the next session. Yes, right now. No coffee. It's not a coffee break. We are going to begin the next session in about 1 minute's time. Could you please come back into the hall? The next session will begin in 1 minute. For those that are outside the theatre, if you could please make your way back into the room. We are going to close the doors and begin the next session on redesigning trade. It's a very important topic given recent developments. What does the future of the TPP have, the Trans-Pacific Partnership? What is the importance of Pacific Alliance, the regional, the RCEP, and the Free Trade Area of the Asia-Pacific, FTAP? A lot of these issues will be discussed and addressed in this particular session. Ladies and gentlemen, for those that are outside, if you could please make your way in. This session will begin in the next minute or two. We do have to finish a bit early as well. We'll be finishing at about 12:10 because President Nieto and Prime Minister John Key need to get to the APEC Leaders Dialogue, and some APEC members may need to be there as well. So we'll be finishing at about 10 past 12. Ladies and gentlemen, our next session is on redesigning trade, a dialogue on strategies for deeper regional economic integration and the new generation of 21st trade agreements. Would you please give a warm welcome to our panel, President Enrique Pena Nieto, President of Mexico, Prime Minister John Key of New Zealand, Ken Allen, the CEO of DHL Express, Enrique Gubins of APEC Peru, and the CEO of Sudamericana de Fibras, and Eric Liu, the Chairman of Jumor E-Commerce. Please give them a warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This session is being moderated by Sean Donnan, the World Trade Editor of the Financial Times. Sean, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's good to see a good, healthy attendance here in the room. I think we've already had a fascinating morning, and really this is a session that I've been excited about for some time as we're thinking about coming here to Lima. I thought I'd start off with a piece of advice that Martin Wolf, who is the great economic commentator for the Financial Times, gave me when I took this job 3 years ago. And he said, "Sean, you're making a terrible mistake. There is absolutely nothing going on in the world of trade anymore." And of course, he's been proved very wrong, and it's one of the few times I get to say that Martin Wolf has been proved wrong. We have seen some amazing developments really in the world of trade, and clearly it is at the center of the conversation really here in APEC, but also in leadership and certainly in Washington, where I am based and have come from for this. It is my great pleasure to introduce the panel that you have here. You've heard their names. I am going to get out of the way very quickly and turn it over to our experts. The goal here is to have a lively conversation, gentlemen, and to keep it free-flowing and so on. But we thought we would start with addressing really what are the we want to think about the future of globalization, the future of trade, redesigning trade, how at this amazing moment that we're facing before us, you gentlemen and your governments and business can play a role in redesigning the future and moving on with the future. I thought we would start with you, President Pena Nieto. I think it's fair to say that you are at the center of what has become one of perhaps the most interesting trade relationships in the world today, one of the most important ones as well. And obviously, with the changes in Washington and the incoming administration, you have an interesting time ahead of you, and your government does as well. So I thought I'd ask you, how do you expect that relationship to change under President Trump, President-elect Trump? And he has talked about renegotiating NAFTA. Is that something that you expect to be engaging in the months ahead?
Bueno, pues muchísimas gracias. I will speak in Spanish, if you don't mind. Muchas gracias por la hospitalidad que hoy nos dispensa Perú, precisamente para la realización de este encuentro. Saludo a la comunidad empresarial que está con nosotros esta mañana, al presidente, el primer ministro John Key de Nueva Zelanda, y me da mucho gusto compartir con él este panel. México en los últimos años sin duda se ha mantenido como un país abierto al mundo, un país que realmente ha hecho de su apertura comercial una ruta para detonar su crecimiento económico y buscar desarrollo económico y social en nuestro país. NAFTA ha sido sin duda uno de los instrumentos muy importantes. México es un socio estratégico para los Estados Unidos, como lo es Estados Unidos para México. Tenemos un importante
we have a
intercambio
very
comercial.
important
Yo creo
trade
que se
exchange.
acredita
I think
en
this
el
can be
millón de
shown
dólares
through
que
the $1
comerciamos
billion
cada
that
minuto
we trade every minute
con los Estados
with
Unidos.
the United
Ese es el
States.
nivel de comercio
This
que
is the
tenemos hoy
level of trade we
con
now
los
have
Estados
with the
Unidos y
United
evidentemente la
States.
integración que hacemos con
Evidently,
Canadá.
the integration
La
we
óptica que
also
México
have
tiene
it with
sobre
Canada
NAFTA es
and
que al final de
NAFTA.
cuentas,
At the end of the day,
tanto
well,
México como Estados
Mexico
Unidos
and the
y Canadá
United States and
somos una
Canada,
región
we are
de Norteamérica
a
que
North
se ha venido
American region that
consolidando
has been
como
consolidating
un nodo
as
logístico
a
importante en el
logistic
mundo
node, which is
que
very
tiene el
important
gran
throughout the world,
potencial de
with great
convertirse en una de las
potential to
regiones más
become one of the
competitivas y
most
productivas
competitive and productive
del mundo
regions of
también.
the world
Y
as
que al final
well.
de cuentas tenemos
And at
una
the end of the day, well, this is
integración
an
comercial
integration, which is a trade
que
integration
favorece
that
a la
favors
generación
the
de cadenas de
generation
valor que
of
realmente,
value chains that
particularmente con los
obviously,
Estados Unidos,
particularly with the
ambos
United
países
States, both countries
producimos para nuestros
produce for
mercados
our
y para el mundo
markets
entero.
and for the
De cada
entire
dólar
world. Out of
que
every
México
dollar that
exporta,
Mexico
40
exports,
centavos
40
son
cents
de insumos
are
de
of
Norteamérica.
inputs from North
Y esto
America.
significa
Well,
que en
this
ambas
signifies
partes,
that both
en
parties,
ambos
both
países, hay
countries,
detrás de ello la
we have
generación
behind
de
that the
empleos.
generation of jobs. And
Frente
on
a
the
los
other hand, in
posicionamientos
the
que ha
face
habido
of the
del
positionings
presidente
we've
electo
heard from
Trump,
President-elect
lo
Trump,
cierto es,
the truth of the matter
pues,
is that
estamos en la etapa
we
primero
are right on the
de
stage right now
privilegiar
of
el diálogo como una
privileging
ruta para
dialogue
poder
as the path through which we may be
construir
able to
una
build
nueva agenda
a new
en la
agenda,
relación
a new
bilateral.
agenda in the bilateral
Entendemos que
relationship. But we understand
México
that
está por iniciar,
Mexico
como el mundo
is
entero,
about to start, like the entire
una nueva
world,
etapa
a
en la
new
relación con los
stage in the
Estados
relationship
Unidos.
with the
Y en
United
términos
States.
comerciales,
And in commercial
queremos
terms, in trade terms,
realmente
we really
darle
truly
valor,
want to
el justo
give
valor que
the
tiene a esta
fair
relación
value of this strategic
que hay el día
relationship
de hoy entre
that we
México y
now
los
have
Estados
between
Unidos.
Mexico
Que
and the
así se logre
United States.
apreciar. Yo
And
creo que
I
hay
hope
muchas
this is
empresas,
appreciated this way. I think there are
tanto de
many
Estados
companies
Unidos
in the U.S.
como
as
de
well
México
as
y
in
de
Mexico,
igual manera muchas
and
empresas
also
norteamericanas
many North
establecidas
American
en México
companies that are
que forman
already in
parte de esta
Mexico, and they are
integración.
part of this integration.
México
On the
está
other hand, Mexico
la posición que
is
México guarda frente a NAFTA,
this
más
position
que de
vis-a-vis
hablar de
NAFTA,
una
more than just talking
renegociación,
about
es de una
renegotiating NAFTA,
modernización
it's
del NAFTA. Creo que
modernizing NAFTA. I think
si bien
NAFTA,
es un acuerdo de
even
casi
though this is an
de más de
agreement
20
of over
años,
20 years
a
now,
partir de entonces
as of
se
that
sucedieron
time, we've
otros
had
acuerdos que
many
México y los
other
Estados
agreements
Unidos
that Mexico and the
firmaron con
United
otras
States have
regiones y
signed with other
países
regions
del
and
mundo.
countries of the world.
Y creo que hemos
And I
aprendido
think that we have learned
que
that
NAFTA puede ser
may
modernizado.
be
Pueden
modernized.
incorporarse
We may
elementos
incorporate
que
elements
cuando se signó
that
este acuerdo
when we
no
signed
estaban
this
considerados.
agreement, they were
Yo
not
diría y
considered at
afirmaría,
that time. I
más
would
que una
even dare say that
renegociación,
more than a
modernicemos
renegotiation, let
NAFTA.
us update,
Hagamos de
let
él
us
un vehículo
modernize
mucho más
NAFTA so that it
potente,
becomes a
un
more
vehículo más
powerful
moderno
vehicle, a more
que
modern
nos
vehicle
permita
that
realmente
will truly allow
consolidarnos
us to
en esta
consolidate
relación
our countries
estratégica de
in this
México con los
strategic
Estados Unidos
partnership of Mexico
y
and the
Canadá
United States
como una
and
región,
Canada, of course,
repito, mucho más
I insist
productiva
as a
y
more
más
productive
competitiva
region
frente al
and more
mundo.
competitive
Yo
region vis-a-vis the
advierto que
world. I
más
can see that
allá
over and beyond
en esta nueva etapa, creo
what
que será una
this
gran
new
oportunidad.
stage
Yo soy
implies,
de
we
los que
have great
está en una
opportunities in
posición
this new stage.
optimista
I'm a
de
very
poder
optimistic
abrir
person. I have a very
o
optimistic
encontrar una
stance
nueva
so that we can
oportunidad
open or find
para
a new
escalar
opportunity
NAFTA,
to
para
scale
hacerlo, repito, un
NAFTA so
instrumento
that
y un
I
vehículo
insist it can
que
become
potencie
an
aún más
instrument and a vehicle
esta
that will
alianza
potentiate
estratégica
the
entre México y los
strategic
Estados
partnership
Unidos.
between Mexico and the United States.
Thank you. Prime Minister, sorry, I'm yelling in my own ear there. Prime Minister Key, I've always thought of New Zealand as one of the great advocates of trade liberalization in the Asia Pacific, and you go back a long way in pushing for greater economic integration in the region, and certainly New Zealand was one of the countries there at the birth of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So what now for this thing they call the TPP?
Yeah. Well, Sean, firstly, thank you. Look, it's great to be back in Lima. I ironically was sworn in as Prime Minister on the 19th of November in 2008. And about 24 hours later, I got on a plane and headed off to Peru for my very first APEC. George W. Bush was in the same position now that Obama is. He's at his final APEC. And so over that 8-year period, a lot has happened and a lot has changed. So it's great to be back in Peru. I mean, if you look over that 8-year period, what you've seen, I think, is no action when it comes to trade from the WTO, really, very limited movement. And so what's ended up happening has been a series, I think, of either bilateral or multilateral deals. And New Zealand's been very involved in those. They've included the ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand Free Trade Agreement. We've signed up a free trade agreement with all parts of China, including obviously mainland Beijing, but also with Taiwan and Hong Kong. We've signed a free trade agreement with Korea, with Malaysia. We're very close with the Gulf states now to completing an FTA. We're in the process of going through an FTA with the European Union. We look to sort of finish that next year. And of course now, because of Brexit, with the UK. But one of the big deals, and probably the biggest deal for us for a very long period of time, has been TPP. And to give you a bit of a sense of TPP from a New Zealand point of view, we always modelled China to see what we thought that would do for our economy. And in terms of tariff reductions, it was broadly in the order of about $130 million worth of tariff reductions and about $1 billion of other benefits. That was the expectation. And in reality of what actually happened was that we outperformed those numbers by 11 times. So it was 11 times more beneficial to the economy than the initial findings of what our economists thought. Wow. TPP is worth about $300 million, a little bit less than that, and $3 billion worth of benefits. So there is a lot at stake potentially for TPP if you ultimately get a better performance than what the economists will tell you, and we think that's likely. So I think there are really three alternatives now that we find ourselves in the position with President-elect Trump saying he's deeply opposed to the TPP deal. First is that there are 12 members of TPP. The United States is obviously one, and with them not necessarily joining, let's say, one option is that the other 11 countries hold hands, and after that 2-year ratification period, we sign up to TPP in the form it's currently been agreed. And our New Zealand Parliament last week passed the TPP legislation. So in principle, if the other 11 countries want to hold hands, then we could do that. From New Zealand's point of view, we obviously prefer the United States being involved because it is the largest place of consumption of household dollars of anywhere in the world. So 1 in 4 dollars spent in any household in the world is spent in the United States. So the benefits of having an FTA with the US are quite great. We've modelled TPP now without the United States, and we still get 2/3 of the benefits. Really? Yeah, from our point of view, because we don't have an FTA with Mexico, my good friend Enrique, and I don't have an FTA. We don't have one with Canada. We don't have one with Peru. So there are other parts that we're missing. There's 5 countries we don't have an FTA with, and if you take the US out, there's still 4 that we would get an FTA with that we currently don't have. So that's one option. The second option is that somewhere along the line, there is some cosmetic change to TPP that allows
You ready?
Oh, coming out.
Donald Trump really put a 45% tariff on all incoming goods from China, it would be the single biggest reduction in income standards and levels of buying for middle-income Americans they've ever seen. Because they buy a lot of goods from China, and if they're going to pay 45% more for them, their standard of living's going down. Yeah. So we all benefit from free trade, and I think as leaders we have to work with the president, the incoming president, but we have to have a really strong message that what we're doing here works, we believe in it, we hope he's part of the program, but if he's not, we're going to carry on doing things.
And you think you've got good chances of bringing him along?
Yeah, I hope so.
We'll wish you luck and we'll be watching.
Thank you.
Kalu, I'd like to turn to you. We this morning listened to President Xi Jinping lay out a strong vision of economic integration. And I'm very interested because your company is at that intersection of the new digital economy and old-fashioned trade in bulk commodities and things like that. And I wonder, when you look out now at the world and the world of trade that is changing, what do you see as your priorities?
谢谢。谢谢会务组这个邀请我来参加这次这个讨论。
Thank you very much, APEC, for inviting me to this dialogue. We all
现在
know
对全球化 我们听到有不同的声音。自由贸易协定的推进呢，也不是非常的顺利。
Free trade agreements and
我们认为呢，
how can we promote free trade? Things are not flowing
各个
as
国
much
家
as we would
因为文化的不
want
同
them to flow.
价值理念的
However,
不
we
同
feel that there are different
以及呢
countries because
对
of
自
their
身
own
利益的
different
考虑呢，
cultures and different ways of seeing things and
在这
different
些
benefits that they're getting. And
贸易
that
自
have
由
an
化的推
influence
进
on
上呢，
this. We
就会产生很
understand
多的
that to
障碍。
promote free trade
特别
agreements,
是如果每个
we
国
are
家
going to be
都是
facing
站在自身的
obstacles,
角度呢，
running into obstacles, especially we
很
see
多
how
的理
each
念就无法
country
推进。
keeps its own position. And there are going to be so many
那
things
么，如
that
果
will
要
not be
达成
promoted
协议，
or
或者让
fostered.
全球各个国
If
家
we
更好的
really
来进
want
行
to
合
reach
作，
free trade agreements,
我们
if
认
we
为
want
互利
all
共赢
countries
是
of
最
the
重要
world
的
to。be able to better
而
cooperate,
互利
I
共赢
think
的话
that a
首
win-win
先要
situation
跳出
is
自
of
己
the
的角
utmost
度，
important, so that we can
站在
all have
全球
mutual
的高度呢
benefits.
来
To
思考
reach
问题
this point, I
站
think
在
we
合
have to
作伙伴
overcome
的
our
角度
own
来思考问
differences,
题。
our own
这样的
positions,
话，我
to
们认为
really
协
be
议呢
part of a
才能更
partnership,
好的
strategic
全球各个
partnership
国家的合作呢
type of relationship.
才能走得
Thus,
更远。
we wide, and this is
我
a
们称之为
world
呢
Thank you. Okay, thank you, guys. Okay, come on, let's go.
得到了很多国家的积极的响应。目前我们已经100个国家的政府、商会、协会呢达成了合作，帮助各个国家的优秀的企业呢到我们线上来呢进行全球价值链的互利共赢的这样的合作。那么我们所有的商品呢，从原材料开始呢，终端消费品的全产业链都是我们所经营的。那么这样对每个企业来说呢，它上线以后呢，它就能找到它的上游和它的下游。而我们所有的，包括金融、物流、大数据、技术，包括智能制造以及 质量认证和咨询等所有的服务业也是我们线上可以交易的。那么，除了商品的交易以外，所有的服务也都可以在线上呢进行采购。对服务企业来说呢，它可以找到所有的需要购买服务的客户。当然，服务企业也可能还会采购服务，所以呢，我们称之为呢共赢的生态系统 ，win-win ecosystem for business， 让所有的国家、所有的企业在我们的平台上呢都能够实现价值，互利共赢。所以我们有一个核心的理念，就是一定要为客户创造价值呢，我们的平台才会有价值。创造不了客户价值呢，平台就没有存在的价值。那么正循这样的理念呢，我们在很短的时间呢得到了非常快速的发展。好，明年呢将迎来我们的高速发展期，我们预计我们的交易量呢将超过8亿美金，成为全球交易量最大的电商平台。所以呢，这方面呢，我觉得中国古老智慧的共赢的理念，为客户创造价值的理念，给我们呢提供了很好的理论基础。那么回到我们今天的这个关于贸易规则和全球化来说，我觉得这个道理也是相同的。所以从这个理念上，如果跳出全球看全球，为各个国家来着想，为各个参与的企业和客户来着想的话，这个模式一定是可以成功的。所以从这个理念来说，我们的 E4B 将来可以服务更多的国家、企业和区域。所以我们也在努力的过程当中，同时呢，我们还建立了文化的平台，帮助各个国家的文化艺术等各个人文古迹的所有的文化呢，来进行上线，来进行交流，推动呢文化与文化之间的融合，消除呢隔阂，使得各个国家之间呢能够往和平友好的方向呢来，使得未来国与国之间的合作呢会更加的融合和方便。那么第三呢，我们专门也成立了一个创新的论坛，基于这样的共赢理念，让全球各个国家的优秀的各行业的大企业呢，定时的呢来进行创新，让各个国家所有的企业能够更快、更好的来发展。因为现在是地球村的时代，全球各个国家的价值都能有互补，都有很好的合作性。所以这方面呢，我们也在努力的过程当中这个简单的给大家介绍一下。共赢的理念非常的重要，谢谢。
This is what I wanted to say. I'm fully convinced of the win-win situation.
We may struggle to get the TPP done, but at least we have an ecosystem for greater understanding in the world that you're talking about there. And this gets into one of the things that I think about a lot, which is the role of business and digital economy almost sitting above all the work that you governments do in terms of thinking about trade and almost moving ahead sometimes. I wonder, Ken, you are, if he's up there in the digital world, you're there in a different sort of arterial world, getting those goods moving around the world at DHL. When you look out at what's been happening around us in terms of the discussions of trade agreements and the way globalization is moving, this backlash against globalization, what do you see there from a business perspective, from where you sit in Bonn?
Well, first, from my perspective, I'd like to say I'm very happy I'm not a politician. And I would like to pledge our full support to the two excellencies on these trade agreements, because, you know, there's always something wrong with an agreement, right? But as long as you have as a whole, things at the moment are going well. In fact, very well. We just announced a record third quarter from a profitability point of view, and the normal fourth quarter peak that we always see at the end of the year is coming through, where volumes in general are 15% higher than a normal period of time. So business does continue, and a lot of that, and I'll come back to it in a minute, is driven by the e-commerce revolution. And we're a partner as also. Thank you for the business. And the real concentration now away from big companies onto small and medium-sized enterprises. And there's an interesting thing about global trade. It has a history of recovering and rebalancing. So if you look at my business unit, which is the Global Express, which is truly, the most international environment in the world. We're in every single country around the world. We've had 22 consecutive quarters of at least 7% volume growth.
Wow.
But in all that time, it hasn't been one region or country at the top all the time. So a few years ago, it was Middle East and Africa that was driving a lot of the growth. Then China and Asia driving a lot of growth. Then Europe driving growth. Actually, at the moment, our fastest growing region in the world is the Americas, from Canada down to Argentina, where we're currently growing at over 10%. So, things change for different reasons, but this is what happens. So it does rebalance. Now, I think Europe is a great example. We all remember back in 2010-12, the Euro crisis, and everybody was talking about the pigs. Remember the pigs? Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain. Well, those countries started to realize, just like all other countries have, well, no point trying to sell intra-Europe. I need to get my product out internationally. And now, Italy and Spain in particular are two of our fastest growing countries in the whole world. And you know why? To the point that everybody's making, the world keeps changing. There's this emerging now middle class in Mexico, in Russia, in China, all around the world. They like European, American, Australasian goods, quality goods, what do I say, electronics and all the rest of it. So this creates a new market for established economies, and this is why free trade absolutely needs to continue.
I mean, those are some amazing numbers that you're talking about there, despite what we see out there. And you talked about this, I think, President Peña, in terms of the slowdown in global trade that we've seen in the consecutive years. The WTO, we heard President Xi as well this morning. I mean, remarkable, 10% growth in the Americas for DHL. You must be grabbing market share from someone. But
Mexico's our biggest grower. Thank you very much.
Enrique, I mean, the story of Peru is much like New Zealand's, is one of kind of great economic integration. You certainly have a president now. We heard from him yesterday talking about the need to fight protectionism, someone who really wants to be engaged with the outside world in the Asia Pacific. When you're doing business there, how worried are you about something like the TPP not going ahead? How much is that going to affect your business?
Well, we are, of course, very worried about what the course of the negotiations might take, but not too worried, really, because we have these two gentlemen here that are going to renegotiate or make Mr. Trump come to his senses. But I'm more worried about the protectionist sentiment that comes with the Trump administration. Prime Minister Key, you talked about the despair feeling that you got out of the people here at the meeting. And let me tell you, when we decided to host this year's APEC here, we never imagined we were going to be in this situation. Also, and since you were there back in 2008, back then we never imagined we would have the financial crisis right at our doorsteps. But yet here we are. So adding to your optimism, I think we should look at that. But by the way, that also shows that Peruvians are very poor at choosing APEC years.
A leading indicator, perhaps.
But let me tell you how we, going back to the protectionist sentiment, let me tell you, and there's many people here in the audience, Peruvians, that were part of this, let me tell you how we dealt with protectionism in Peru, because we have had that sentiment, and we have had the past two elections, or three, the previous two elections, were elections where the protectionist sentiment and proposals were all over the place. Let me go back a little bit further. I mean, we came from the 70s with a very, very protectionist government, a military government, dictatorship, radical left wing. We came out of it with Belaunde and Mr. Kuczynski as Vice Minister of Finance. They tried to open the market again, but the country was not ready for it. Then came Alan Garcia, and he closed the country again, started to controlling prices, and we hit the record inflation. We have the highest inflation record after Germany's post-war inflation. Then came Fujimori, he started opening the country. He put us in APEC in 1998. And it was President Toledo, who was here earlier, who negotiated the free trade agreement with the Americas. And of course, Parliament and most of the population back then had a very, very strong protectionist sentiment. So businessmen here in Peru, we got together, and Mr. Raffo, chairman of APEC, had formed COMEX, which is now in charge of this organization. Alfonso Bustamante's father, he is a founding member and one of the first funding members of the Instituto Peruano de Economía, Peruvian Institute of Economy. They provided the numbers. And most of the businessmen that are sitting here were part of that effort. We started lobbying, and also we hired media commercials to promote free trade. We really wanted to get the FTA approved. And the good thing about this is that the arguments in favor of free trade, as you've said many of them, and many people during the previous days have pointed, are very strong. And the arguments against protectionism are even stronger. So I think that what I feel is that Americans, and especially American businesses, if they are there, should take charge and make the case for free trade. And that, if they succeed, and they have money, the new economy, which is going to suffer, the idea of bringing back manufacturing jobs from Mexico to the US, and maybe losing new economy jobs to someone else, maybe that's an opportunity for Mexico. And in the end, you will end up paying for the wall, not to get Americans crossing it over. So that's the thing. We have to, the business leaders of America, of the US, have to get together and make the case for globalization, for free trade, and the case against protectionism. After all, Mr. Trump is a businessman, too. Thank you.
So, President Peña Nieto, if I can come back to a point that you made in your opening remarks, and that is the need to modernize NAFTA. And a lot of us who were watching the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the exercise there, heard President Obama talk about that as an effort to modernize NAFTA and other trade agreements as a new 21st century trade agreement. If you go back to NAFTA and you want to modernize it, what are the key elements that you would like to see in there, and where do you take them from? Do you take them from the TPP?
Antes de dar respuesta a esta pregunta, creo que el centro de este debate está precisamente en algo que aquí ya se ha referido, es sobre las ventajas que tiene la apertura comercial, el libre comercio. Y quizá lo que hoy estamos apreciando en distintas partes del mundo supone ha sido un impacto negativo para el desarrollo de las sociedades, los acuerdos de libre comercio, cuando es justamente todo lo contrario. Yo creo que el libre comercio ha deparado prácticamente buena parte de las economías mundiales, mayor desarrollo, mayor crecimiento económico, mayor inclusión social. Pero también es cierto que hoy estamos observando un cambio tecnológico y a veces se confunde el que si este cambio tecnológico que ha desplazado eventualmente mano de obra, que ha sustituido tecnología por ciertas habilidades y que hoy se necesita escalar las habilidades y las capacidades que tengan las nuevas generaciones que estén incorporando al mercado laboral. Confunde esto frente a los grandes beneficios que tiene la apertura comercial. México, quiero ser claro y enfático, seguirá siendo un ferviente creyente realmente de la apertura. Para México ha significado un cambio en el paradigma y en el desarrollo de nuestro país en los últimos 30 años. Y hoy diríamos, tenemos en los diferentes puntos cardinales del mundo mostrando nuestra apertura. Con América del Norte, que sin duda es el acuerdo más relevante e importante para México. Con América del Sur, particularmente a través de la Alianza del Pacífico, en donde Perú es miembro de este acuerdo. Con Europa estamos renegociando y actualizando y modernizando, yo lo diría en estos términos, actualizando nuestro acuerdo de libre comercio y esta posibilidad que abre el TPP. TPP yo creo que hoy pasa por un momento de gran incertidumbre. Incertidumbre a partir de, sí, la importante definición que deberá tener el gobierno norteamericano sobre su eventual participación o no en este tema, o a través de qué modalidad o a través de qué esquema se puede lograr el TPP. Porque todos los países que hemos trabajado en este acuerdo advertimos los importantes beneficios. ¿Qué diría yo de NAFTA? ¿Dónde se puede modernizar? Hay capítulos o hay temas que en su momento no fueron abordados, que hoy están abordados en otros acuerdos, no solo en TPP, yo diría en otros más. Yo diría que TPP me parece que es quizá un acuerdo que ha incorporado las experiencias últimas de todos los países firmantes de este acuerdo, que es un referente. Yo lo pondría solo como un referente, pero no como el modelo necesariamente a seguir en lo que sería la modernización de NAFTA. Creo que hay elementos en TPP y en otros acuerdos, en los propios que ha firmado ya los Estados Unidos con otras regiones, en su actualización con la Unión Europea. Hay elementos que me parece pueden ser incorporados. Temas de medio ambiente, que hoy todo el mundo advierte en esta actualización y modernización de un acuerdo que creemos será benéfico para los países que integramos NAFTA. Testimonio que aquí hemos escuchado de hombres de empresa que tiene para el desarrollo de nuestras sociedades. No nos dejemos confundir por estos sentimientos proteccionistas que empiezan a crecer en distintas partes del mundo. Creo que la apertura y la integración, la globalización al final de cuentas, ha reportado más beneficios que perjuicios. Más bien, veamos qué acento y qué impulso le ponemos el día de hoy. Y sí debo reconocer que la visión y el posicionamiento del nuevo gobierno de los Estados Unidos será un factor muy importante de este acuerdo, no de este acuerdo, sino de lo que eventualmente predomine como visión en términos de apertura, de crecimiento y desarrollo para nuestras sociedades a partir de lo que nosotros queremos en México. Es la apertura y libre comercio del que México ha sido un importante promotor y ha logrado alcanzar desarrollo a partir de este vehículo.
Thank you.
Prime Minister, just to build on that, the subject of our panel is redesigning trade. Yep. And clearly the voters of Ohio, the voters of Wallonia in Europe and who exerted their influence over the Canada-EU agreement have a very different vision of globalization and its impacts than either of you gentlemen do. How do you bring those people along? What do you need to do in terms of trade agreements or perhaps domestic policy to make sure that those people understand the great benefits or believe or buy into the great benefits that Enrique and others have talked about in terms of globalization?
Well, I think the first thing is if you just go back and take a little bit of a case study of New Zealand for 30 seconds. Prior to 1984, we were a very closed economy, very much like you were describing in Peru. So, if you wanted to bring margarine into New Zealand, you need an import license. We made wine in New Zealand because you really couldn't import it. It was some of the worst wine in the world. You'd never want to drink it. Awful. Okay.
You have some good whites now.
Yeah, well, the world's changed a long way. So what happened was, once we started on the pathway of free trade, which started with Australia with CER and sort of moved from there, we essentially eliminated all of the barriers to entry in New Zealand, eliminated the tariffs, and it was really anybody could export whatever they wanted pretty much in an unprotected way into New Zealand. what is true is that has quite a dramatic impact on your economy. And initially, some industries did go, like car manufacturing. What we did in wine, for instance, was we ripped out all of the vineyards and we paid the viticulturalists to plant new varieties, which were really Sauvignon Blanc, which is now, you know, massively successful, exporting 70% of all of New Zealand's wine that's exported is that. And so you've seen the wine industry now going through $1.5 billion worth of exports. Wow. So what's happened is your economy definitely changes. And I think it changes in two ways. It reflects partly the digital world that we're now in, but we have a heavier services part of our economy, and we're specialists in certain things. And I think what that's meant is that somebody that was working in a manufacturing plant in New Zealand maybe 30 years ago, making shoes, they're not in that job anymore, but they're in a different job. And what I think is happening in, I suspect, in places like Ohio and Michigan and Detroit, is that they're losing those jobs there. The United States is probably gaining those jobs in other parts of the country, which is why its unemployment rate's 4.9%. But that's reasonably cold comfort to those workers who are either out of a job or can't get a job paid at the level that they were. So I think if politicians are going to win the argument for free trade, they're going to have to win the argument that they're either going to provide the retraining and the retooling of those workers, or do something around mobility of those workers to move out of one part of the economy to another. Because it is inevitable when you have free trade that you get greater specialisation. It's slightly easier actually in a smaller country because by definition it's sort of just the way things work. We can't be expected to make everything. It's a little harder in the United States. So I think that's one thing. You've got to sell the merits of that, and you've got to provide the practical opportunities for people to do that. I think it's when you say to them, look, you're just better off, but then don't do anything about it, that you will get the pushback that you're currently getting. Because whether we want to accept it or not, those people in those parts of the United States believe it's real. They believe that they're worse off.
Absolutely. Yeah. I wonder if we can turn to the question of leadership. Leadership in APEC and economic leadership. After Mr. Xi spoke earlier this morning, I had someone say to me, he just announced himself as the new leader of the push for trade liberalization in the Asia Pacific. And people have talked about perhaps the end of U.S. economic leadership in the Pacific. I'll turn to the President first and then the Prime Minister and ask you, who are you looking to for leadership in APEC at this moment? Do you think we are seeing a shift to a new Chinese leadership?
Quiero reiterar la visión que México tiene en términos de apertura comercial.
Protectionism in our country, and this meant that our productive plant was able to be modernized and be more competitive and for us to grow. Those are the
Creo que este
benefits
modelo de la
of
apertura comercial debe significar también que es un tema que aquí poco se ha abordado, el que sea mucho más incluyente, y es donde yo creo que hay mecanismos también todavía que pueden perfeccionarse para que pequeñas, medianas empresas logren tener una mayor inclusión dentro de los beneficios de la apertura. Yo sí quiero ser enfático, para México sin duda la relación central dada su condición geopolítica, es con los Estados Unidos. Es evidentemente que es hacia allá, hacia donde estamos mirando, el lograr, y es por lo que hemos venido trabajando, precisamente por lograr una integración mucho más consolidada con Norteamérica, dado el nivel de hoy de comercio y de integración que ya tenemos. NAFTA en los últimos 20 años, precisamente eso es lo que nos ha dejado. Beneficios advertimos en México, particularmente en la relación con los Estados Unidos, para ambas naciones. Canadá también forma parte de este acuerdo integral, los tres países. Y México
Okay. Okay, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul. Right out the back. Back up slowly. Thank you. Okay, thank you, guys. Okay. Come on. Let's go.
You ready?
Oh, come Okay. Okay, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul. Right out the back. Back up slowly. Thank you. Okay, thank you, guys. Okay. Come on. Let's go.
So what I'm about to say, I think, should be seen in the backdrop of that we get on really well with both these countries, and we're not trying to particularly pick one side or the other. But there needs to be a bit of reality, because the reason that President Obama did TPP was all about the Asian pivot. It was all about the United States showing leadership in the Asian region. And there were lots of reasons for that. And if you go to the United States and ask them within their system who is advocating for TPP, of course it's USTR as the lead trade representatives, but it's actually the Pentagon and the Defense Department. And they have been arguing very strongly that the US needs to be a leader in the region. And I went to the US for Leaders Week about a month or so ago in the UN, and as I said to the think tanks that we spoke to then, we really like the US being in the region. We think they're great partners, we think they're great friends, and we think they add something to all of the countries there. But in the end, if the US is not there, that void has to be filled, and it'll be filled by China, because they're big, and we have a good relationship with China. It's just a matter for the United States whether they want to be there or not. But I went to G20 in Brisbane, and at the G20, the deal that China and the United States on climate change had just been done. And President Xi gave his intervention there. And at one point he said to President Obama, I'm going to keep my side of the deal, are you going to keep yours? And President Obama said, well, yep, I am, and I don't need congressional support to do that. I mean, in the end, because you've got the same situation happening with climate change and the meetings of Marrakesh that you've got happening with TPP. I mean, in the end, the United States can chart its own course, and it'll have to do that. But there's going to be a lot of difference between candidate Trump and President Trump, because President Trump is going to get the same advice and have to consider the same issues. Does he want the United States to be a leader around the world in a whole lot of different areas? And if he does, then the United States is going to have to be engaged. And I personally think President Trump will be very much like chairman of the corporation Trump is. In the end, he's a flexible business guy. He's going to realise that he's got a role to play. He's going to realise that the US has shown global leadership for a long period of time. And I think he's going to want to continue to do that. And I don't know how he navigates through the nuances of all these things. But I personally am a lot less negative than a lot of other people, because I think in the end he'll find a pathway through, because it'll work for the United States eventually, and it'll work for him. Now, he'll have to track that pathway, but I don't think we should give up. I think we just got to keep talking to him. I think we've got to keep encouraging him, and I think we have to keep making the case.
I'd love to keep having this conversation. Unfortunately, there are some angry red lights flashing at me here, and these gentlemen up here can see it as well. Gentlemen, thank you so much for a fabulous discussion. President Peña Nieto, Prime Minister Keys, Enrique, Ken, Eric, thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please, another round of applause for our wonderful panel. Thank you so much to President Peña Nieto of Mexico, Prime Minister John Key of New Zealand, Ken Allen, CEO of DHL Express, Mr. Enrique Gubins, and Mr. Eric Liu, Chairman of Jumor E-Commerce, and thank you so much to Sean for our wonderful moderation. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now break for lunch. We will begin again at 3 p.m. this afternoon with the President of Colombia, President Santos, who's going to talk about innovation. Following on from the President of Colombia, we have a wonderful talk by Ian Bremmer, who will talk about the geopolitics of the region and a lot of the things that have been talked about over the last 2 days. Ian Bremmer will be able to distill and provide some provocative, thought-provoking for a robust discussion. And he's also happy to answer as many questions as possible from you, so please come later with your questions. So we'll see you back here at 3 o'clock later with the President of Colombia, followed by Ian Bremmer. And we'll also have the President of Vietnam as APEC moves to Vietnam in 2017. During the break, if you'd like to, Facebook have a pop-up booth where you can see some of the technology that Mark Zuckerberg talked about. The booth is actually at the International Media Center, which is located to the left of the CEO Summit building as you face the roads. Go through the International Media Center, and the Facebook pop-up stand is there. There's also a Peruvian stand where you can learn more about some Peruvian culture and some delicious Peruvian food. Thank you once again to President of Mexico and Prime Minister of New Zealand. Thank you very much. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you back here at 3 o'clock for our next session with President Santos. Thank you very much and enjoy lunch. Oh, the other thing I'd like to say is that if you have anything to ship back, DHL up there if you'd like to take a selfie with the Royal Canadian Mountie. Thank you. We'll see you later.